Hello, 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 everyone. It is Reverend Tanika Steens, and I am the Mindful Coach. And today on Mind Your Business, my guest is Dr. Jen Blanchette. She is a psychologist and podcaster. Dr. Jen Blanchette is the host of the Tbi Therapist Podcast. She has a clinical practice in Freeport, Maine, where she specializes in transformative therapies such as EMDR, Gottman couples interventions, and biofeedback. For the past 10 years, she has specialized in therapy after head injury trauma and spiritual concerns in mental health. So, she's talking my language today, talking about mental health and spiritual concerns. She lives in Maine with her house of boys, including a therapy dog named Brady. She's a fitness professional and yoga teacher. She's happily married since 2009 and loves to talk about marriage and relationships, as do I, which further says why she's a Gottman couple interventionist. She has 4 degrees in psychology and over 20 years of experience in mental health. We can learn something today, guys. She is the host of Tbi Therapist, a podcast that explores the intersection of mental health of the heart of brain injury. And she's a trauma recovery. And trauma recovery is realizing your body that the event is over. So what she's telling us today is trauma is helping you to realize when you're in recovery that the event is over. So maybe it's not a body thing. Come on, Dr. Jen.
Yeah.
Tell us more of who you are, what you do, and why you do it.
Yes. So I'm Dr. Jen Blanchette. You gave me a great intro. Thank you for that. And so the past 10 years, I've been focused on working with people after a brain injury, but I've seen a whole bunch of different folks. So I go back to this, spiritual integration and interventions that I do, since I think that kind of dovetails nicely with what you're talking about. I trained at Regent University, and that's in Virginia Beach, Virginia. And I learned specifically Christian interventions into psychotherapy and psychological techniques. So some of my clients are Christian and they really want that service. They want me to integrate their faith into their services, and some are not. So the way I was trained is basically I don't impose my beliefs. I'm not a theologian, I'm not a pastor. But for those folks that do want that service integrated into therapy, they really enjoy it. And some of my people won't even go to like a non-faith provider, which is interesting because I think there's not enough people who specifically are Christian counselors. So if you can get help, I think that's more important than having someone who is in your faith. But it's great if that's what you feel called to, certainly. So right now, I'm currently focused on the TBI Therapist Podcast, which has been specializing mostly with people after a concussion. And so most people do not know that a concussion is a mild traumatic brain injury. A lot of people think, okay, a TBI, a traumatic brain injury, that's not a concussion because people who play sports get a concussion and then they have to go on this protocol and they get back and they're fine, right?
Mm-hmm.
Most of the time they are. Most of the time they are. The majority of people are fine, but up to 20%. And we're finding out that 20% of people struggle after a concussion. And that is significant. And a lot of people don't get the right treatment. They don't get the right help because they don't know what to do. Number one, because it's not really out there. Okay, what do you even do for a concussion if you're struggling? Okay, do I go to therapy? Do I start going to PT? And I find even your, regular doctor may not have those resources on brain injury or concussion. So that's been my passion. I did my postdoctoral residency in neuropsychology. And I'm not a neuropsychologist. I do some testing, but I have focused more in the therapy side of things. So that's kind of unique to something that I do. I'm trying to think any questions right now. I'm going to stop talking for a minute.
Well, you're absolutely phenomenal. I know a lot of times when people hear psycho in front of anything, it kind of is like, ooh, what does that mean? And they're more apprehensive of reaching out because they think that it means something totally different. Can you kind of explain and walk us through what that is and what it looks like when you're working with someone with that kind of trauma or injury?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So like a concussion specifically or a brain injury?
Yeah, the concussion and brain injury.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so generally I'll see them after they've gone to the ER or something like that. Most of the people that I see have been struggling maybe for months or even years with their concussion. So a lot of times, if we're getting to the months and the years later, they are struggling with some anxiety, some depression, and some major interruptions in their activities of daily living, or what we call for short their ADLs. And even though a mild traumatic brain injury or concussion, you have that word mild on there, but it is not mild, because a lot of
Mhm.
with the mild traumatic brain injury have lost their job. They have lost relationships. Their life has completely changed. And I kind of say it's not like you can have mild cancer. That's not a thing. You have cancer or you don't have cancer. And I'm not
Yeah.
minimizing cancer, but it's just to kind of put that context of you have a brain injury or you don't have a brain injury. The mild, moderate, and severe TBIs is more of like a medical distinction. Like did they have a loss of consciousness greater than 30 minutes? Then it's going to be a moderate TBI. So it has nothing really to do with your recovery after a TBI, because I've worked with people who've had a moderate or severe TBI and they're actually doing okay. Like they recovered and they're doing relatively okay. That's not common for severe, especially most likely if you've had a severe TBI, you're going to struggle with some things later in life with your cognition or your relationships or something like that. But I think just to get to drive it home that a mild TBI or concussion can have long-lasting ramifications, especially if someone has struggled for a long time. So I think I've dedicated my career to that, because a lot of times when people come to me finally months or years later, they have been struggling, and then depression or anxiety has developed. And many of these folks say, I've never had anxiety before, never in my life. And then I had this brain injury and now I struggle going to the store, or I struggle in my relationships. I don't know how to communicate like I used to communicate. And so I hear that all the time. Like, I've never had anxiety or depression. I'm like, I've heard that so many times and I get it, but it's part of what it's like to recover from this
Mhm.
condition. So I think just to normalize that for people,
Yeah.
you're not crazy. It's
Thank you.
at
That's
all.
what I wanted you to touch on, because I think when we hear anything with psycho or psychosis or psychotherapist, they're thinking, well, I don't want to be labeled as crazy. And it has nothing to do with being crazy. It's
No,
your mental health. And that's the thing I've been trying to normalize as well, Dr. Jen, is mental health is something that is a very relevant issue, but we're not normalizing the conversation when it comes to talking about mental health, because I know if you go back decades, when you say somebody has a mental issue, then they think that it means crazy and they are put in rooms or they're in straitjackets. And that's not the case, because people with mental health are walking around living normal, functioning lifestyles. But there's something going on that is a disconnect that we just need help with. And I say we
yeah.
because I've dealt with it myself. So I totally understand. And people can look at you and think that, oh, you look normal. But what does normal look like? And what is normal to you? If you have been living a healthy lifestyle, healthy brain functions, and then all of a sudden you start to feel bouts of depression and anxiety that you've never felt before, that's not normal for you.
Right.
But if you've dealt with that for a long time and you think that it's okay, that's normal for you. Not necessarily healthy for you, but that's normal for you. Hey, Crystal. Crystal just said hello, lady. So hey, Crystal, thanks for joining in and watching. But we just want to get this out there, because there are some people that are suffering in the world today that are afraid to ask for help because they don't know what kind of help to seek. First off, they don't understand what trauma has caused damage to their brain, because trauma can, like you said, it doesn't have to necessarily be from a concussion from a sport, but trauma can come from many different facets in life. And
Right.
I realized that a bug can cause you trauma if it flies into your car and gets into your eye. You know,
Is this a
that
real life
can
experience?
absolutely. And so I
Yes,
thank you so much for saying we're going to normalize what that looks like. Thank you so much. I appreciate
of
that.
course. And I think, and I would include myself in the we, there are times in my life where I never thought, like, I've never struggled with depression. And then when I had my first son, this is not related to brain injury, more related to me. I had my first son and I had severe postpartum issues, depression, anxiety. I had trouble sleeping. My son has a congenital heart condition. And so he was in the hospital for 10 days, had heart surgery as a little baby. I'm a new mother. And I got home and I just, I would, every time I would put him down, I thought that he wouldn't wake up. And it was really traumatic to me. There was a squirrel in the attic that we didn't get out for months. So I had this newborn. I can't, I'm worried about him breathing. The squirrel is in the attic. We couldn't get out for like 3 months. And it was just sleep deprivation is number one, can make you have severe anxiety. And then add the postpartum symptoms, all those other things. And so I'm thankful for that time in my life so I can understand what it's like to not really struggle with depression and anxiety. And then all of a sudden feel like, I don't know how I'm going to feel tonight. I don't know how I'm going to feel tomorrow because I don't know if I'm going to sleep, if I'm going to be so worried about this new baby. And so I think it's just to normalize that there are times in our lives when mental health symptoms can just kind of literally smack us in the face. And we're like, what just happened? Where did this come from? And I think more recently talking about the pandemic. So I don't know of anyone who's not struggled with mental health in the pandemic. Most people that I know have said they've had an increase of anxiety, increase of depression, just due to the isolation.
Yes.
Of not being around people.
Yeah. And then getting acclimated back into the world. It goes from you're isolated in the home I know for me, I enjoyed being able to have my family together at one time, but there are some people that could not handle that. They couldn't handle having everybody in the same place at the same time. It wasn't normal for them. And so they had to adjust to that. Then after becoming getting that normalized, now it's like, okay, now go back out into society. And now people are a little weirded out about what they're going back into. They don't really know how, to transition back into that. And they start thinking things that they wouldn't have normally thought before. And, it's okay because sometimes people that are a little bit more resilient can say, well, just get back up on that horse and ride it, right? But there are some people that are like, never want to go near a horse again if they fall off of it. And so you have to approach every situation different, and we have to show people a little more grace as well and have an understanding. But I think when you can relate to something like the postpartum, I've never went through that myself, but I have dealt with having my little new grandbaby come over and spend the night. And it freaks me out. Like, I'm watching him every second because he's like a brand new baby. Is he still breathing? Is he okay? I didn't sleep all night because I was worried that I want to make sure when his mom comes and picks him up, he's going to be okay. That's anxiety. And we don't really understand kind of what that looks like because, again, we think that when you say words like anxiety and depression, it means you've been diagnosed with something and that you have some kind of illness that's uncurable or something. And it's like, no, sometimes we struggle with some things and there's different levels of it. But when people get to the level of them having to come and see you, that's something else that we're talking about. And so, you've just opened the door up for so much because I know there's so many people dealing with things on so many different levels and not really understanding where to start or how to reach for help. Or because like you said, concussions doesn't necessarily have to come from a sport related injury, or trauma can cause brain injuries as well. So helping people to understand that what you're going through is okay and asking for help and where to go to seek this help, because sometimes people feel ashamed or guilty or feel judged. And how do we open the door for people to be able to get the help that is needed?
Yeah, I think it starts in the family, really. I mean, it starts with every individual, I think, in their own family, normalizing that mental health is part of our health, that everyone is going to struggle with anxiety and depression at some point in their life. I don't care who you are. I haven't met anyone. I even call it the common cold of mental health. because there are going to be times in life that we're sad. There's going to be, that's normal. It's totally normalized. We may not have a full blown, diagnosis of a major depressive disorder or an anxiety disorder that I would diagnose with someone, but maybe like we've been through a pandemic or we're at a different time in our life where it's a more stressful situation. We've been through a trauma.
Yeah.
It really doesn't matter, but I think just life can impact us, and that's really normal.
Yeah.
That we're gonna have some effects from that. And I think specifically for my population, like they get into like, I'm anxious about going to the store because the store becomes overwhelming. And I always thank God for these moments where I'm like, Lord, I think you're bringing this to me today because because you want me to understand my clients more. So
Mm-hmm.
in the pandemic, the store became scary to me. I remember in those early pandemic days, I would let my husband go to the store because I was scared of the virus initially. Like this is like, I mean, talking about like March, April 2020, right? I'm not that way now, but I always think like, oh, the store became really anxiety provoking for me in a different way that it never had. And it had me understand kind of, I was looking around like, is someone going to sneeze on me or,
Yeah.
be weird or get too close and all that stuff, which such a crazy time. But I think it was an extraordinary circumstance that of course it made people anxious. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm always thankful of those experiences. So I kind of have a piece of what it's like for someone to feel what I'm working through with them.
Yeah, I totally get that. Now, I wanted to touch on something because it just came to me. I was thinking about this, like in ministry.
Yeah.
I know for myself, before I answered my call, and, I always believed in following Christ and I was very spiritual. And I felt like because I believed in God and because I followed Jesus, that I shouldn't worry about anything and I shouldn't
Yeah.
get upset and I shouldn't feel sad and I shouldn't cry and I shouldn't let things bother me. And I learned that was toxic positivity, right? So I'm just trying to
Mhm.
feel like everything is okay when truthfully it's not. And I wouldn't feel those things because I felt like, well, I'm a Christian and I'm not supposed to act like that. Well, that's not true. And I think a lot of people in ministry sometimes hold themselves to higher standards and feel like they've got to be untouchable in certain ways to show other people that, you've got to be strong in the Lord. Well, no, you don't. It never says that. It says that in your weakness, he's made perfect, right? And so when we're able to be vulnerable and to be able to feel our emotions and feel what we're going through, it helps us to understand that's just the human side of us. But I know that in ministry right now, there are a lot of pastors that are committing suicide, that have anxiety and depression. And there's a lot of things as far as coping because they don't really have the outlet. Like they're the outlet for other people, but they
Right.
don't normally have the outlets. And then they might be not be in a place to feel like, well, it's okay for me to ask for help or to seek therapy or to talk to someone. And so I love the fact that you can pair the spiritual side of it with what you do as well in helping your people, because I think that is so needed in ministry right now, that is overlooked, and that our pastors and ministry and lay and clergy are getting neglected and abandoned because they're the ones that's supposed to have the answers, right? And they're the ones that you're supposed to be able to lean on. But who do they release and lean on and be able to understand that it's okay that they feel these things, and it doesn't make them less than a Christian. It doesn't make them less than a believer to
Right.
go through human emotions. I had to learn that myself.
Yeah, I think that's so true. And I've worked with several people in ministry, and I think that there's this there's this value in the church that you have it all to, and it's not even spoken, but oh, you're the pastor. You need to have it quote unquote all together, right? Because you're leading people. And I think that can get people in trouble because when they're not human, when they don't have the accountability or the support for when they do get into these tough spots, they don't have that support, then how are they going to be able to manage all the stress that people are bringing on them? And I certainly know that as a psychologist, I'm in my own therapy. My therapist, shout out, you know who you are. She's
Amen to
awesome.
therapist.
Yes. In my church community, I think that is a big support for me. But for people in ministry, I can go to church and just be a church member. And I'm kind of like being ministered to, right? For them, they're not often receiving that. And there's these other, I call it Christianese, that, okay, you can't show emotion, or you can't break down, you can't be authentic, because then you're not going to be Christ-like. And it's just not true. And I think churches are waking up to that. I think there's more and more churches that are aware that we need to embrace mental health treatment. We need to talk about it. We need to talk about what to do when people are depressed, that if people need a break, they need to take a break, that's really important. I think that's one of the good things that have come out of the pandemic as well, is that there's a greater awareness and understanding of mental health and discussion of mental health in a lot of different areas. But we could always use more awareness and work there, certainly.
Yeah, I know on third Sunday in our church, we do a mental health break, and we go over different ways to be able to do self-care and meditation techniques, as far as how to really get in a space that is safe with yourself and to spend time with God and to just meditate on scripture and to be able to release and spend that time. And I think oftentimes we don't get that. We need to be able to find our peace and center ourselves so we can go back and function correctly. And I think that if we don't take the time out for ourselves and fix what's going on, and not necessarily fix what's going on, but at least try to find out what's going on with us, that doesn't seem quite normal to what we would think is normal to ourselves, and seek the help without feeling judged, without feeling anxious, without getting upset or hiding away, and being more authentic. I think that is the conversation that is being readily discussed more than it was in the past. Because I know 20, 30 years ago, people weren't talking about this. They'd rather sweep it under the rug or turn the other way or act like everything was okay when it's not okay. And I see a lot of posts that say it's okay to not be okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it depends on the culture of the church, of the culture in your even region, your culture in many different aspects of culture, which could be, racial identity, could be other types of experiences that might make that community where it might be harder for someone to talk about mental health. So I think there's certainly barriers that can come up in different communities that might be unique to that community. So I think just recognizing, like, for yourself, like, what is it like in my family to talk about this? What is it like in my church community, in my racial group? And to identify all those for yourself, and to know that, like, give yourself grace that it might be harder for me because of this part of it or that part of it, and to identify who are those people where it is safe to talk about these things. Like, not everybody is a safe person. And I like to say a safer person, because
no, you're right. Everybody's not a safe person. And I mean, that's just the truth. It is. And sometimes you've got to watch who you're pouring into and who's pouring into you, that is not actually absorbing your energy and draining that from you, but is actually helping to, like you said, support you and helping you to understand that it's okay, instead of making you feel like you need to just get it together and get over it. And what's wrong with you? On so many levels, that's why people shun away from help, because they don't want people to think something is wrong with them. If you are, my daughter plays tennis, and I know that a couple of times
we're
she's
going to talk
out.
now. I'm an avid tennis player. Okay.
Here we go. So she plays tennis, and it was so hilarious to me because she's not even playing sports at this time. She's just at gym, and she comes in from outside and she's passed out. And so my mom freaks out and runs her to the hospital. So they're like, oh, what's going on with her? And so I'm like, she's dehydrated. She doesn't drink enough liquid. That's what's wrong with her. So now we're ready to get her ready for tennis season and everything. And they're like, oh, before we do that, she's got to have a heart test, and she's got to have a this, and she's got to have a that, and blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, oh my goodness, seriously, she is fine. This child never gets sick. And so we've got her tested, all this stuff, and she's okay. She goes out, she plays tennis. Now, has she ever passed out playing tennis? No, she hasn't. She's never passed out playing tennis. But when she was younger, she ran into a wall. This boy pushed her into a wall and she hit her head. And we took her to the doctor. Her tooth was busted, but they didn't find that she had a concussion. Now, could there be something stemming from that that's deeper? I don't know. Sometimes she gets really bad headaches, but they haven't seemed to find out what is going on with her. And she's had a problem with her eyesight, and she wasn't wearing her glasses. Come to find out, she's not wearing her glasses. She's having headaches. So we got her contacts. Guess what? Problem is solved now. She hasn't passed out anymore.
Well, that's good.
She's fine.
Great
and so I'm just like, we're trying to diagnose all these things that's going on. And it's simple as she just needs to wear her glasses. And since she doesn't wear her glasses, we got her contacts. I'm not saying that that's all of what the problem was, but it did solve what was happening with her. Now, there for a minute, she was going through some things where she was feeling stressed out and she was feeling overwhelmed and she was feeling anxious. And I'm like, it just said I needed to do a software update for some reason. But when she started to wear the contacts, it seems like all of that started to go away. And so I know I just brought up the sports thing, but I want to say how much of this is sometimes in our mind and that we bring on ourselves.
Yeah. Well, I would say some of it. So, I think what we know about mental health issues is it's likely due to several factors, genetics. So certainly in families, you'll see anxiety and depression, OCD, different mental health diagnoses run in families. The highest, what we know is called concordance, is with schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. So, if someone has been diagnosed with schizophrenia in the family, there's a likelihood that someone else in the family could be diagnosed with that particular diagnosis. So we always got to think about the genetics. Like, did mom tend to be anxious? Did grandma tend to be anxious? Whatever on that end of it. And also with our environment, were we exposed to traumatic things? That's certainly going to impact our nervous system, and I think through the body. So our mind is connected in a nervous system all throughout our body. And I think we're finding out more and more that the body responds to things before the mind has time to make sense of it. So like it's simple. We're going to take the bee in the car. Okay. Was it a bee?
Yeah, I just said bug, but bee is fine. Yep.
Okay, we'll do a bee. So you see the bee in the car, and all of a sudden your hand is swatting stuff, and you're like all tensed up, and you're hyper, and your body is telling you threat, danger, act now, before you're like, I'm scared, and before the mind says I'm scared. So our nervous system is primed for survival. So it acts before we can even have that thought often. I think that's specific with trauma. Certainly. So I think there's this interplay between mind and body that's important not to neglect.
Mhm.
Certainly. So where the mind can come back into it is that we make a judgment of that situation. I can never be around bugs again. I can never be in this situation again. Then I avoid that situation in my life. And so whenever I can see an animal or a bee in this situation, my body won't let me even go there because it remembers. Your heart actually has its own nervous system. It can react, and it's bee, and it starts beating before we tell our mind I'm scared. So I think you just can't neglect that part of it.
Mm-hmm.
But I also think that we have to be mindful of what we're telling ourselves, what stories we're telling ourselves. So certainly, I think if we continually tell ourselves, like, I'll always be scared of this, I'll always be, that's going to mean we're going to avoid that situation. We won't give our body a chance to get over that experience. So I think that's how the mind kind of comes back into that situation.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I was thinking, as you were saying that, I was thinking about my daughter with her different transitions from at first she was all about wearing the glasses and she was fine. And then when she stopped wearing the glasses, when she had the headaches and was passing out, and I was like, what do we have to do? I know you need to drink more water, eat more vegetables, but we need to make sure you can see because you're not focusing. And now that she's able to see and focus, I don't even think that that's a thought in her mind anymore. But before, I think she was so weirded out because she didn't want to tell us that she can't see, but she didn't want to wear the glasses and she was trying to be cool, and it was causing her to be anxious and all these things. And so I'm like, we're going to eliminate this. But she hated anything coming towards her eye. She was freaked out about putting things in her eye. And I'm like, okay, this is the last resort. You have to be able to overcome this. So I took her to the eye doctor. I knew if I was in there with her, she was not going to cooperate. So I stayed away. I let her make the decision. I let them work with her to help her put them in. They said she was a pro the first time putting it in. And when she heard that, everything changed for her. So now she's like, she never goes without her contacts and she doesn't have these problems anymore. But again, it's things that she was telling herself because she was scared of certain things.
Sure.
And now she realizes that she doesn't even think about that stuff anymore because now she's solved that problem. And it was small, but it could have turned into something way worse because if she keeps passing out, she's going to have brain injury eventually, right?
Yeah.
So.
And that's a good point, I think, with trying to catch something before it gets to a point where it's like, oh my gosh, my anxiety is so bad, I can't even go at the house. If we were to catch it back where like, I'm kind of struggling with this little fear and I'm avoiding these situations, let's say like a common fear of being on an airplane. So maybe it started when you were a teenager. Oh, I get really scared going on the airplane. And then when I see somebody who's like 40, I mean, the treatment is much more difficult than if we had caught that when they were 16 and they first had that fear of flying on the airplane. And I liken it to, your physical health. Like, okay, I've had, my blood sugar is starting to inch up a little bit and my doctor's really encouraging me to really work with a nutritionist or work with a health professional to kind of work on just my wellness, my nutrition pieces of things, right? But then you don't do it. You don't follow up on that 4 months, years, whatever. And then full-blown type 2 diabetes, health is not in a great place. So I often think about, can we intervene more soon, like more quickly?
Yeah.
I'd love for there to be more integration of mental health in like doctor's offices or places where people are often going. So it's not like, okay, I have to go to the therapist now because is this so bad? No, you can go when it's just like, okay, I probably should get this checked out, or I probably should address this thing. Go do it because it's going to be so much easier for you to do that than it is down the road. And I think that's when it goes back to the family really normalizing the anxiety and the depression, your common colds of mental health, and say like, hey, well, what's helpful is, I've gone to a therapist when I've had some anxiety or depression. Maybe you try that out and see if that's a tool that you can use. And it's not a tool for everybody. So I also want to talk about other ways that people can, I think, find support, because certainly, my experience of being trained in a Christian integration program, like people will only want to get support in the church. And I think if it's not like a full-blown mental health diagnosis, do that. If you can talk with someone like a lay counselor that's been trained in the church, great. Do that, see if that can be helpful for you, or trying to, work on your fitness, trying to incorporate more mind body things, whether that be exercising or doing some stretching, relaxation training, whatever it is.
Yeah.
There's things that you can do.
Yeah. Well, a lot of times people will go on a diet, they'll go to the gym, they'll go running, they'll work out to get their bodies in shape. But they don't understand the mind is just that much more important. I'm a mindful coach, and I can tell you that when I very first started, people were looking at me sideways like, what is that? Like, it was like really weirding them out. And I'm like, no, if your arm hurts, you go to the doctor and get that checked. if something's going on in your mind and you need some mental clarity and you need some help, you need to speak with someone that specializes in that can help you and point you in the right direction. I may not be the coach for you, but you might need a therapist. You might need a psychologist. You might need someone that can go a little bit deeper, but at least I can maybe help point you in the right direction. But again, normalizing that
Yeah.
conversation
And coaching is
is
huge.
where it starts.
We don't have enough therapists. Right now I'm actually in this huge like business transition with I'm closing my current practice and launching coaching and doing more of a national focus with the concussion stuff. And I can't find referrals for some of my people. So that is really a struggle that I'm thinking of other things. So coaching is definitely a big resource that I think people should utilize more often. And I feel like they'll more readily do coaching. Some people will, then they will go to therapy. And, I think the difference is with coaching, we're working on wellness. We're working on trying to encourage like health promoting behaviors for me because I do brain health coaching. So I help people, my work with helping people whose brains are injured. I have so many tools that I can throw at you if you want to improve your brain functioning. So I'm pivoting a little bit to doing some of that in coaching, because if we work on our health, we work on how we're functioning in general, then maybe it won't turn into depression, anxiety, or dementia or other problems
Mhm.
because we've taken care of our mental health. We've taken care of our physical selves, our wellness, and we've employed some strategies likely that you teach or that I teach as a coach. So it's definitely an option for people that I think people are learning coaching is, and I know I have a coach too and a therapist
Mhm.
as well. So I
Yeah,
believe in the power of coaching to, really catapult like your potential. And I'm really on not being motivated by fear and being motivated by my dreams and my calling and really what, as a Christian, and you are too, and what I feel like God is calling me to versus what I'm scared of or what I like, okay, well, I can't do that because, that's going to mean, I think a lot of
yeah,
times we react to life with fear and we do different things instead of saying like, I want to really lean into my power and figure out how I can be my optimal self.
absolutely. And I think a lot of times when people look at therapists and coaches, again, as well as pastors and anyone in a position that they think is maybe an authoritative position that they have to go to someone, they think that these people normally have it all together and that they have all the answers. But you said it yourself. I'm going to say it. I believe in therapists. I believe in having, you know what, if I can come and pay someone and talk to them and they just listen and I can just let it all out. When I get done, I know they need a therapist. But I'm
Yeah.
grateful because you know what? I can't unleash all this on my family. They're not ready for it and they're not equipped because when I was going through some things, they weren't equipped to help me.
Right.
They had
And
no
even
clue what that looked
even
like.
if you have a husband as like psychologist, which I might have, they don't want to hear it either.
No, I mean, seriously, I remember my husband would come home from work and before he would get through the door, I would be like, brrr. Little did I know how much I was stressing him out and that he's like, lady, I just got home and now you want to unpack all of this on me. And eventually I realized that, ooh, that's not fair to him. That's not allowing him space and time to come home and unleash because I'm like, you don't ever tell me anything. And I'm like, oh, well, he probably doesn't have opportunity to because I'm always ready to go. And when I started going to therapy and then he started going with me and we started doing couples therapy because of ministry, both of us absolutely were like, wow, we needed this. This was good for us individually and being married and in our ministry. And, it really helped us to be able to see things from different perspectives and how to understand each other a little bit better and realize that sometimes we need space and we need to take a step back. And it's okay if somebody is venting, but it doesn't necessarily mean they're taking it out on you. We've got to take ourselves out of situations sometimes. And I think within a family dynamic, sometimes if someone comes to you, if I go to my mom and say, Mom, I'm having these mental health issues, she would immediately be like, well, no, you're not. There's nothing wrong with you. Because I'm her daughter, right? And she's like, no, I had a perfect child. Don't you dare say that. But in reality, now she gets that, oh, you know what? I understand it. I see what you're going through. And that's why sometimes we can't get the help until we're 40 or 50, because we've been locked in a closet to where, don't you dare say that. Don't you dare make us look like bad people. And
Yeah.
it's not that you're bad people. It's not that you've done anything wrong. I think about a parable in the Bible when Jesus fixed the blind man's eyes and they said, what's wrong with him? What did his parents do wrong? Like,
Right.
they didn't do anything wrong. Sometimes things just happen that we need to deal with. And that's like a light bulb coming on saying, hey, like an engine light in a car. Hey,
Right.
you need a tune up. You need to get checked out.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So what else is it that you would like for people to know about what you do or what they can do to take care of themselves and be more readily aware to accept what's going on and seek healing for it?
Yeah. So I think maybe I can talk a little bit about brain health and coaching and what I'm getting into with that and maybe what people can do for their brain health. Because really modern life has created a war for our brain. There is so much that's calling our attention, whether it be social media, our phones, literally our phones. And and myself included, it's like you see people walking around and it's an appendage.
Mm-hmm.
I'm holding my, if you're listening to this on the audio, people just stay like this. And I actually read some research that our attention span as a human race is reducing because of this taxing of our attention. So I really feel called to help people with that piece of it, who maybe are professionals or leaders who need some help because they've tried the productivity hacks. They've tried to, to optimize their time, but they have so many things pinging at them, whether it be media or family demands, and trying to balance all of that is really, really hard. Especially for women. Women, I think I was listening to some other psychological research on time poverty or time abundance. And women,
Mm.
yes, women with young children, especially who have a partner, they are working and their partner is working, they have the most time poverty. And neither one is great. So if if you have too much abundance of time, that's not great either, because we need to be active, right? We need to have some involvement where we have something to do every day. I see that with folks after a brain injury where they can't work, and having too much time can be a problem. But part of the brain being overtaxed can be part of that time poverty. I don't have any time for myself. So addressing some of that, getting some more, white space in your schedule for restoration, whether that be meditation, for the Christian, potentially time for movement. And so I really talk about 4 things that the brain really needs. And that's based off of my work with brain injury, but every brain needs this, right? So all brains need movement. Our cells need movement. So the CDC recommends 150 minutes of exercise. Americans aren't getting that on a whole. And I think as a fitness professional, the best exercise is the exercise you will do for mental health, for physical health, and for brain health. So I think that is number 1. And we always think about that actually for concussion recovery, because that actually gets people better the quickest, is moving your body. So number 1. Number 2 is sleep. So as a society, we are sleep deprived. We have a problem resting, also due to modern life, also due to how we're working now. We are on screens. We take screens to the bedroom. So the bedroom should not be for anything but sleep and intimate activity. Those are the only things that should be done in the bedroom.
No
So
kids.
well, I mean, I have children that end up in a mat, on the bed. So I know about that. That's a phase of life. Like, I think, mothers just struggle with sleep because of the phase of life thing, right? But
Yeah.
if we can control it, yeah, kids wish they could be like, okay, not today. Maybe tomorrow you can come to mama. Yes. So nutrition is number 3.
Mm.
So looking at how we're fueling our bodies, I personally have like an intuitive eating and health at every size approach. So I don't believe in promoting dieting or diet behavior personally, but figuring out how can I add nutrition, how can I help my clients add really solid nutrition to their lives, because there's also a war of like food, there's all this easily nutrient, there's really dense food available that isn't great for our bodies, like fast food or highly processed food. So really, I mean, I think of like the only diet plan, it's not a plan even, the only nutrition eating style that has been shown to have mental health benefits is a Mediterranean style eating. So there's no other type of diet, no keto, no carnivorous. Someone told me there's a carnivorous diet now. I was like, no, they need to stop.
Stop it.
Stop. Carnivore diet. I can't. I'm done.
It's the tree bark diet. Just eat it. It's good for you.
I have no idea. I just, okay. I don't know why that came about. I was mad. Someone told me that in a session and I was like, why are they doing this? They're punking us. I really.
Okay. Like, seriously. Ashton could just come out now.
Oh no, we can't. The carnivore. No. Anyway, sidebar. But the diet industry has just gone bananas. It really is very simple. Like eat things that come from the earth. Can we just do that? That's good for you, generally.
Yeah,
Unless
yeah.
you have special needs for your body or for a health condition. I get that some people do need to eat a special diet for different reasons, like someone who might be struggling with diabetes or someone who might have a stroke, have had a stroke or seizure disorder. They might need to limit certain types of foods. I get that 100%. But just for any old reason to be on the keto or the carnivorous diet, no.
Yeah. Yeah. If we could just go back to a simpler time when we just ate plants. Right?
Yeah. And there's so much shame with food. There's so much, I mean, with women, when I work, we have to go through like body image stuff and shame with food shaming that's happened in our families. So, I mean, that's huge when I work with women, anyone really. And the last one, number 4, is social connectedness and belonging. So there's been really, really solid research on mortality, even more so than the nutrition, the exercise, any of it. The more socially connected we are, the better we are in our lives. So the longer the longer we live. So, and it's really having interconnections. That's why my favorite sport, tennis, which I play a few times a week, we have really great mortality statistics because it's a very social sport. So we're always like communicating, having little parties and playing together. So a lot of the people I've played tennis with over the years, we get together very often. So I would encourage you, like you can do things about those 4 components, and that's the springboard for brain health. So if we're not getting solid on our springboard, we can't work on our attention, on our executive functioning, on our memory, on our brain really being able to control emotion too. Interestingly enough, like everybody knows this, it makes sense, right? If you don't sleep the night before, how do you feel emotionally the next day?
No,
not right.
It's not good. No,
it's not good. Not good. Right.
It's not. So I recommend naps.
Yeah, I've always had a couch in my office so I could take a nap.
Yeah. That's what they're for.
Yeah, that's why therapists have couches. Because we need naps.
Absolutely. I mean, you have been very educational today. And you really enlightened me on this whole tennis thing. Because that little girl that I was telling you about, at one point in time, she was very socially awkward. She is really coming into her own. She's played tennis for the last 3 years, and she's actually coaching and managing the boys team right now. So her season hasn't even started yet. And so they are, I think, 12-2 right now. And so they're really doing pretty good. But she is just totally a social character now. I mean, she's funny and stuff inside the home, but just as the way she's flourishing. And I think tennis has helped her. And what you just said just was like, wow, I see all of those things going on within her. And I think that even us with our children, we have to allow them to be able to flourish, to find who they are. We can't put them in things that we want them to do or be successful at. We have to let them find their own way that's going to help them, because never in a million years would I imagine that she would have picked tennis. Seriously. It just was so funny that she comes home and says, Mom, I want to play tennis. And I'm like, okay, play tennis. I don't care. I encourage them. But she is really good at it. And she is becoming this social butterfly that is hanging out with her friends and her tennis team and doing parties. They were going to go out to dinner last night after a game, but they decided they're going to do it another time because it was late. But everything you said just made me see that, wow, that's a good thing for her. And so people, if you're looking for something that can get your children socially active, persuade them to do tennis. It's really a great sport, and it's fun to
it's a
watch.
lifelong sport, I'd say. So I
Yeah.
started when I was 10 and I'm 42 now. So it's a sport I've played my whole life. So I had maybe a couple years of break in between, but it's something that you can do for your whole life, which is a
Yeah.
great
Yeah.
sport.
And it's good for your cardiovascular and everything.
And low concussion risk.
Unless you're getting hit in the head with the ball, but yeah. So
very rarely that would cause a concussion. So
yeah,
it's, a very concussion safe sport.
yeah. So before we jump off of here, I just want to ask you a few more things about like the concussion part of it.
Sure.
Is if someone was going through something and has suffered a concussion and not known that they actually had a concussion, how long does it take for that to be take an effect on their life and to change? And does that lead to, because I know I watched the movie Was a Concussion, and just
Yeah,
I think with Will Smith, and that was like very eye-opening just watching that movie. It was like, wow. And I don't know that I think a lot of people are so invested in the sports that they play and they want to continue, but they don't really realize how it's affecting them. And I think with boxing too.
right. And I think with sports like boxing or with football, it's a lot in the subconcussive blows. So there's a lot of times in football, they don't get knocked out or they wouldn't have stayed down for a couple minutes. It's those little like hits that happen all the time that they're saying is causing the problems with multiple concussions over their lives. So if you've had one concussion, you're more at risk to have another concussion. So especially in the first 30, I'd say really in the first year, if you've had a concussion, really be mindful of really not engaging in any type of activity that is going to cause another one. Like things can happen. It's life. And a majority of concussions do not happen in sports. It's a fall. So in Maine here in the Northeast, many times when I worked in neuro rehab, most of my clients had sustained a concussion from like a fall on the ice or just a general fall. So especially if we're talking about for an aging population, just to be mindful of a fall risk, because that can lead to concussion, especially in elderly population. It's the highest, percentage of concussions. The next would be motor vehicle accidents. So I think just being mindful for your general health to prevent concussion, doing some of those things. And I think fall risk prevention can certainly be met with doing like having, an active lifestyle, continuing with your wellness, with your health, so that, you have a stable base basically, and that you're less likely to fall.
Yeah. What about domestic violence?
Yes. So about 15% of traumatic brain injuries are due to domestic violence. And again, we don't have great research because actually I have not seen anybody in my clinical practice that has knowingly told me that their concussion was from a DV event. However, we have this information about concussions that 15% come from assaults or domestic violence. So those were probably presented to the hospital. They presented from a domestic violence event. And then they've had problems with concussion after that event, and likely have had other events that have happened, blows to the head or a concussion that have not been treated. So maybe when they get to treatment for the concussion, it's been the third or fourth concussion, for example. They are much further down the road. Their brain has been injured and not had, adequate rest and treatment and recovery.
Wow. So tell us how we can reach you. I've got TBI Therapist up right now at TBI Therapist. Is that your Instagram?
That is my Instagram handle. So I'm at
Okay.
TBI Therapist on all the socials. My website is tbitherapist.com. So those places are the best places to reach me would be the TBI Therapist sites, because that's what I'm closing my main business, but I'm still going to
Okay.
be seeing clients. But it's still open currently, but I'm winding down on that. Thank you. But the tbitherapist.com is probably the best place to connect with me. And so if you need some information, certainly like my podcast, if you're wanting to know more about brain injury and concussion, is probably a great free resource. I also have a free email course if you wanted to learn more about that.
Absolutely. Well, we thank you so much for taking the time out today to bring your expertise on the show and share with us. And I know that there are some new mommies out there and some tenured mommies out there that gleaned from some things from hearing you talk about the postpartum depression and anxiety when it comes to their little ones as well. Because, I
Yes.
mean, being a mom is tough. There is no one size fits all rule with that. And just being a human being, period, being in ministry, being in life, life is exciting and adventurous, but it can take you through some things, right? If you are still living after a day, you've been through
Yeah.
something, right? Getting
Yes.
here takes you through something.
It does.
So I thank you for sharing your experiences and your knowledge with us today. Is there anything else you'd like to leave with us before we jump off of here?
Yeah. I mean, I think just hope, that if you're struggling with something, there is help, that you can always reach out to someone. You can get support. So, especially if you're struggling with concussion, like you don't have to suffer with symptoms. Please reach out and keep searching for hope. You might not have reached the person that can really help you yet.
Now, you heard it here first. Dr. Jen is an expert and she knows about the brain. If you need some help, reach out. She is there. She's going to be moving towards more coaching of the brain as well. And I'm really interested in learning more about that. I love the neurological side of everything. And so
Yeah,
I
it's so
definitely will
interesting.
be following your podcast. Tell us what your podcast is.
It's TBI Therapist Podcast. So all the name is the same. And so I interview people who've had a brain injury. So I love hearing their stories and how like that journey has looked for them, as well as professionals in the brain injury world. So I focus on, just providing information, resources, and hope for people who've gone through a TBI or concussion.
All right. Well, moving out of 2020, and what year are we in?
Who knows?
2022? Oh my God. I'm just like kind of, I need some help with my brain. I'm like, where are we? We're in 2022. Moving out of 2022.
What year is it?
Going into 2023. Let's be, we've been on this heart healthy kick, right? Everybody's all about heart health and the little Cheerios and all of that, heart health and maintaining. But let's start moving towards looking at brain health and what we can do to have a better healthy brain, better mental health, so that we can function more fully. Because I can guarantee you, if we get our mental in order, our heart will probably fall in place. What'd you say? Tell us about what'd you say about the heart again?
The heart has its own nervous system. So it has its own neural connections. So I do biofeedback. So that's one of the therapies that I do. So by directly like doing exercises and seeing the feedback of our heart rate variability, we can help our bodies basically calm down. We can help our mind to calm down just by engaging in the smart heart, because we have a very intelligent heart. So I think, and we often, when we think about heart things, we go here, right? Matters of the heart. So they're connected. Gotta connect us here.
Thank you you just wrapped it up right where I needed you to, because the heart and the mind, when they are connected and in sync together, you're powerful. So get your mind intact, get your heart intact, everything else will fall in line. They've got to be in agreement with each other. Your heart and your mind have to be in agreement.
Preach.
Right? Because out of the heart, the mouth speaks. So what we think is what we become. So let's remember, we were created with a purpose. So it's time, you guys. Let's be great. heart, mind, and soul.
Mm.
Let's get it together. Dr. Jen, thank you so much for your time. Hang out with me while I get us off of here. Everyone else, I
Yeah.
will see you at 6:05 when I will have Susie Hayes, who is a psychotherapist and certified hypnotherapist today. She's a certified sex therapist and life coach and business coach. And she'll be on to back up all we've been talking about on this segment. No. So
That'll be fun.
I'm sure she's gonna talk about something a little bit different
A little
than
bit
the
different.
brain.
A different brain, maybe.
Yeah, a different brain. Different brain. So tune in at 5:35 and we'll have her on. And if you would like to be a guest on Mind Your Business podcast, you can follow me on Instagram or YouTube and Facebook and Your Full Mind Life, yourfullmindlife.com. You can sign up for a podcast there, and you can go to TBI Therapist Podcast to get with Dr. Jen to talk about your brain injuries or trauma or recovery with her. She'd love to hear your story. Until next time, have a great day. Be blessed.